Al Pacino happened to have the same agent I did back in the day, and one day I got a call from the agent that said Al Pacino really loved my movie At Close Range, and he'd like to meet you. He has an idea for a movie, and would you be interested? And I said, of course. And so I said, when? He goes, well, now. He's outside your house. And I think back on it now, and it was just the time when there were the big, thick brick mobile telephones, and in shuffled Al Pacino with a pile of scripts under his arm and this big brick phone. And one of the scripts actually was Seven, the movie Seven, which I read, and we both decided that it was so gruesome that it would be impossible to film, although obviously David Fincher proved otherwise. And the other script that caught my attention was Glengarry. I had seen the play in New York and always was knocked out by it, and Al had gotten it directly from David Mamet, who wrote it on assignment from this producer who is passed now and was a DC area real estate guy who threw $1 million at David Mamet and said, we'll write a screenplay, which at that time was a lot of dough. And so David wrote the screenplay totally on his own, without any directors or anything. It was just totally a spec idea. And then when it was finished, the producer didn't know quite what to do with it, and Mamet gave it to Al, and Al showed it to me. I got interested, and away we went. It's the movie I made with the heaviest star power and the heaviest potential for there to be aggravation and conflict. And it turned out to be the opposite. It was the most conflict-free movie I've ever made. And I attribute that to the actors all respected each other. They were all really established and acclaimed in their own right. And they respected each other, and their place in the hierarchy of Hollywood stardom directly mirrored what their place is in the hierarchy of The Office. So at the time we did it in the 90s, Al Pacino was the biggest star in the group. Jack Lemmon had been a huge star and was now a little bit past his prime, like Shelley Levine. And Ed Harris is a great character actor, but a supporting actor, as is Alan Arkin. And Jonathan Pryce was the odd man out, who was a Brit and not part of the hierarchy of The Office and of Hollywood. So he fit perfectly into his role. So I think everything just was correctly cast, and so all the actors felt comfortable in a 3-week rehearsal period, which nowadays is incredibly luxurious, a thing to be able to have. But all the actors were very game and wanted to put in the time. And I met with each one of them individually to begin with, to deal with just their character and their point of view of what was going on. And then I would rehearse with 2 characters who had scenes with each other so that they both were sharing the same reality of what's going on. And then I would include other people. So finally, in the 3rd week, was when all the actors were together in the same room. And that was the first time that we would start actually running through the dialogue. Prior to that, it was just discussion about the psychodynamics and the backstory and the subtext of what was going on with each character. And we didn't focus on the words themselves, performing them. It was just intellectual conversations. But in the 3rd week, we sort of got up on our feet, so to speak, and actually said the words. And as you know, in Mamet plays, the words have a certain rhythm to them, and that rhythm has to be acknowledged and fulfilled, or else the play loses all its energy and loses what it's about. But that was great in the 3rd week, because you get 4 or 5 actors together in a room where they're all in the same scene, and they all have to hit their lines perfectly and fast on top of each other. And if one person stumbles, remember the first time we tried to do that, it was horrific, because all those actors had different speaking cadences and different approaches to acting, where some of the actors may hear the other person's line and take a pause, think about it before they responded. But the rhythm of the Mamet stuff was that there were no introspective pauses. People just live, and the subtext and introspection comes in reflection, not in the moment. So in that last week, it was the first time we got everybody up on their feet and did the pitter-patter ping-pong of the dialogue. So by the time we started shooting, we were pretty used to those rhythms. You cry on this word, you want me to sit down, you want me to smoke a cigarette, you know. He was kind of practical. When Al is kind of much more emotional. So they're very kind of different. So when they were in scenes together and I would say cut and want to go up and talk to them before the next take, I had to whisper to them individually because the other person wouldn't understand the language I was talking to the other actor. Because Al, being method, wanted to do 20 takes all the time, and Jack Lemmon wanted to do 2. And so when we're on take 18, I just heard Jack mutter under his breath, "Method actor," as if it was the most derisive thing he could possibly say. But that's how bad it got. Only that bad. So when all the actors were in the scene together and I said cut, it was quite the challenge to go up to each one of them and, you know, speak German to one and French to the other practically. And you have to keep straight in your mind who influence-free movies I've made. There was only one moment that happened. This was funny to me, and a producer who's long past now, so I don't mind telling it, that he came up to me with just one suggestion. He said, wouldn't it be great if there was just one moment somewhere in the middle of the movie where all the guys were together in the Chinese restaurant and they're all having a good time and they all like each other and there's no friction and no tension. And I said, no. That's a bad idea. The whole movie's about the friction and tension between. In the middle of the movie, you're going to have them all hugging each other and saying everything's cool. But that was it. That was the extent of interference. And when I said no, that was the end of it. So I was pretty lucky to have it together. Before it was going to get released, I sent it to Mamet. And it was funny because I remember I must have been in denial when I sent it to him of how much I cared about his reaction because I didn't think much about it. I figured it was a polite courtesy to show it to him. But then he called and I wasn't there and had an old school tape answering machine, you know, reel to reel. And he left a message where he had just seen it and he was ecstatic. He was just over the moon ecstatic. And David Mamet doesn't kiss your ass, you know, doesn't do anything except say what's bluntly on his mind. And I remember standing in my kitchen listening to that and just having the hairs in the back of my neck stand up. I was so satisfied. It was maybe the most satisfying moment of making the movie, was getting his enthusiastic approval. And the only thing that pisses me off is that I saved that cassette tape for the longest time. And somewhere along the way, I remodeled my house and that tape got lost. Because I'd love to listen to it now, or when I'm in a really bad mood or thinking that my life is crap or something. So it's hard to remind myself, but I have a pretty clear memory of it. The first screening I can remember having with actors in an audience was in the Venice Film Festival. And the people watched the movie and were very respectful and super quiet and applauded politely at the end. And it got really good reviews in the French newspapers. But when a week later we had a premiere in New York, where all the actors were there, the audience laughed hysterically from beginning to end. And it was a much more engaged, rambunctious sort of thing, where the New Yorkers thought it was all darkly funny, in a good way, entertainingly darkly funny. But I always remember that big difference between the French. The marketing of the movie was pretty lousy, and I remember being quite frustrated in the first weeks when it was released because were lucky enough to get really some great reviews, and I felt as if the ad campaign and everything was just not exploiting something that was happening. But luckily, with the invention of different distribution models after the fact, the movie has stayed alive and grown, and that's very satisfying. I mean, on the set the other day of what I'm shooting now, the cinematographer just out of the blue said, "Always be closing." And he wasn't saying it for me or anything. He was just walking around talking to his crew and saying, "Do this, do that, and always be closing." And I thought how cool it is to have a saying like that enter into slang. And when I first saw Saturday Night Live spoof that Alec Baldwin did, which he called it Always Be Cobbling. It was a Christmas thing, and he had the elves, and so he was yelling at the elves to always be cobbling. And I thought, how cool to be part of. One thing that I regret about the experience is, because I'm very, the thing about getting awards and Oscars and stuff like that is I'm very conscious of it being a crapshoot that's influenced by a lot of things. And for reasons that are complicated, the movie had absolutely no Oscar campaign, zero. And Jack Lemmon was secretly, I could tell, feeling like maybe he'll get a nomination. And the fact that he didn't is, I regret and resent. Just him. I mean, Al got a nomination with no campaign and stuff, but to Jack it meant a lot. And at that point in his career and stuff, and the fact that he was looked over by the film, because I did what I wanted, for better or for worse. And sometimes I've done what I wanted on movies and it's for worse. So I'm not the genius of all time. But in this case, I just did exactly what I wanted to do, and I felt like it was the right thing to do. It was successful because of that. So it's immensely satisfying. And there's something so great about movies where they exist. They continue to live. They don't die after their theatrical release. So you can visit them, and people still somebody will post on Facebook the Alec Baldwin scene, and it gets 100,000 likes. So you feel like it's alive in the atmosphere.